Hey Unwrappers, Ollie here. Just before we get going, let me tell you about the Week magazine's summer sale. It is the perfect excuse to relax and reflect on the last 7 days. With news and opinion curated from over 200 trusted sources, the Week magazine will leave you feeling fully informed on the issues that matter. Subscribe by August the 21st to receive 6 free issues of the Week. Plus, for a limited time, you'll also receive free access to the digital edition and save a huge 61% after your trial. It's our best offer yet. Visit theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the code SUMMER to claim this special offer today. That's theweek.co.uk/offer and the code SUMMER. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday, the 5th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen China beginning military exercises with live fire around Taiwan, England winning the Women's Euros finals in a 2-1 defeat against Germany, and BP reporting profits of nearly £7 billion. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Sorcha Bradley. From the Eye, it's science writer Tom Chivers. And in case you thought 2 weeks just wasn't enough, he's back for a third. It's Arion, always available in August, McNicoll. And Arion, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
So this week we learned that the Arab Spring might have finally cycled through to winter.
So I think in terms of what Tunisians will see just every day, not a great deal will change because a lot of the power is already in Kais Said's hands. But he can hire and fire cabinet ministers. He can hire and fire judges. If he wants to, he has the ability to change the constitution, to give himself the ability to be president for the foreseeable future, for the rest of his life. So once this changes, I think what happens next in the next few weeks and months will be crucial when we see how he will use that new power.
Middle East correspondent Anna Foster reporting for BBC News from Tunis last week. Arion, what was she talking about and what's happened this week?
So she was talking about the fact that there's been a referendum in Tunisia. But what's happened this week is that Tunisia has given a dressing down to the US envoy Natasha Franceschi after the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed some concern about that referendum that took place last week in the country that's often called the birthplace of the Arab Spring, which has taken a pretty sharp turn away from democracy, given that Tunisian voters passed this referendum, which grants the country's president, Kais Saied, really wide-ranging powers, which also simultaneously weaken the country's parliament and its judiciary.
Yeah, so if you missed this story too last week, which would be understandable because it has been underreported in the West, basically President Saied went to the country, said, let me know if I can have almost unlimited power, and an overwhelming majority democratically said, yeah, fine.
Yeah, exactly so. So, I mean, it should be noted that only around a third of the 9.3 million registered voters cast ballots, though of those voters, 93% of them approved it. Tunisia's main opposition alliance accuses the Electoral Board of having falsified turnout numbers, which aren't enormous. You know, a third of the eligible voters voting isn't a huge number, but I think people were expecting many fewer to take part. So that itself may be an inflated number. But basically what it does is the new constitution overturns the 2014 constitution, which laid out this semi-presidential system where power was shared between both the president and the prime minister. And this new version basically places all of the command of the army, allows the president to appoint government ministers without parliamentary approval, and really makes him virtually impossible to remove from office. So it's a really sweeping group of new powers that he has gathered into his own hands.
Yeah, I mean, this is really Saied just cementing the power that he had anyway, isn't it, Sorcha? You know, he's gone for a referendum, but, well, fill us in. Tell us a bit about him, what he's been up to over the past year.
Well, when he sort of came on the scene in 2019 and was voted in as president, he was actually a relatively little-known candidate. I think he was a law professor at Tunis University, and his supporters really kind of gathered around him because they saw him as the antithesis of the political elite who had kind of been ruling Tunisia up until that point. And they saw him as someone who could root out corruption from Tunisia and move it towards its sort of democratic ideals, which it had obviously in the wake of the Arab Spring. But, last summer, economic conditions have got much worse in the country. There's been a lot of political deadlock, and the country was then contending with a massive anti-government protests as a result. And so Said suspended parliament and he fired his prime minister. And he kind of called it a moment to weed out corruption and break the deadlock. And in fact, this was all relatively popular at the time, with lots of his supporters kind of standing by his decision to do all this. But over time, the support for him has waned as the economic situation stays pretty dire. And now, he's basically this power grab. I think people are now looking again at kind of the moves he's making.
Okay, but let's just analyse that. I mean, Tom, Sorcha just said support for him has waned, and yet this was a public vote. And as I say, of those who voted, and many didn't, the majority said we want to give him more autocratic power. What's going on?
I would be very nervous of any developing country or imperfect democracy which says 93% of anybody voted for something. That is not a number I instinctively believe. I mean, whether he is popular, certainly one of the reasons the US has been unwilling to put lots of pressure on him up to now, despite something of a slide into authoritarianism, has been that he seems to have been popular. He seems to be a slightly Trumpian figure who says, I will bypass the elites. I will deliver these results straight to the people. I alone can fix it, that sort of stuff, And I feel like that sort of thing is a popular thing to say in countries that are struggling with massive economic problems and, gridlock in political systems and all that sort of stuff. So promising, the classic populist playbook of promising the world and worrying how you actually deliver it when you get there has generally worked quite well for getting people into power. So I'm not necessarily surprised that this stuff is popular.
There was another reason, though, wasn't there, Arion, which was that the opposition to him told people to veto the vote. What was the sense in that? Don't turn up for this thing that's going to change forever how much power he has.
Well, I suppose they could see that the writing was probably on the wall and they didn't want for the referendum to be given any more legitimacy than they believed it deserved. But, at the same time, it went through, as you say, and I think that he does remain quite a popular figure so far. He's a really weird and interesting contradiction, Syed, because on the one hand, he is this very uncompromising ideologue who's unwilling to listen to almost anyone around him, except apparently his wife. And yet he lives massively modestly. He's not the type to kind of order up a pet tiger and serve guests frozen yogurts flown in from Saint-Tropez as Ben Ali, who was ousted during the revolution, apparently did.
I'm glad that there was a historical precedent in that very specific example.
Yeah.
That wasn't just your flight of fancy of what you would do if you were the king.
Oh, I probably would do those things. But he does show this massive amount of compassion for the poor, and he insists that his goal is simply to take back power from these corrupt elites and restore it to the people. And he ran, when he ran for president, under the slogan of the revolution, "What the people want." And he continues to try to, he says, deliver on the same principles that the revolutionaries believed in, specifically guaranteeing education and healthcare and decent lives, and to conduct this purge of corruption that Tunisia has long been struggling with. But, it's a long process, and whether him granting himself these powers is going to be effective, particularly in restoring the economy, which is just a very nuanced and complicated story, well, that's going to remain to be seen, really.
But also from an international perspective, whether he says he's fighting for the values of the Arab Spring or not, the point of the Arab Spring, at least viewed from here, Sorcha, was here are the people on the street asking for democracy. Well, they were specifically asking for bread, freedom and dignity, weren't they? It was interpreted as basically democracy, not this, not one man vote. What's gone wrong?
Well, I think as we've kind of discussed, there's huge economic problems and political deadlock. And the supporters of Said say, this is the only way we can deliver the dreams of the revolution. While I think others are looking at it much more practically and saying, well, at this point we have to choose stability in our country over democracy, which, I think that's an incredibly interesting question. But I think we also have to remember, the democracy in the country is extremely, extremely, extremely young. It had only just been born, and even in relatively what we think of as stable democracies, if you look at America, those can kind of quickly start to look a bit precarious and then almost sort of knit back together again. And I think it's kind of interesting to see, how will this go? Is this sort of an attempt to stabilize the nation before kind of handing the country back its democratic ideals, or will it go the way of the other countries that were involved in the Arab Spring, where that ideal and those dreams are just totally over, and it doesn't seem like it will ever be possible there.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it, Tom, from a Western perspective, that stability could potentially be seen as a revert back to a strongman leader. That's actually what people, when they were asked what they wanted, said they wanted what they had.
Yeah, that's also what, from a sort of international relations point of view, not that I'm any sort of international relations scholar, but there was a lot of people saying, look, it's a lot easier to deal with one strong man in charge of a country than a messy place undergoing a revolution. It's to slightly not answer your question, but just sort of pontificate about a thing that I'm thinking about. It's funny that this is Tunisia, because it was Tunisia that it all kicked off in. It was where the whole thing there was Mohamed Bouazizi, who, I'm probably mispronouncing that, who set himself on fire and initially sparked the whole Arab Spring revolution across the Middle East. And it just, maybe this is a small c conservative point, but watching all these countries get these, I was reporting on it, writing the live blog for the Telegraph. It wasn't like I was there in a flak jacket or anything, but the incredible hope at the time of people. So look at these countries birthing themselves into democracy. The birth of social media driving these sort of this incredible change in the population, and one by one they slide back into authoritarianism. It's a reminder of this sort of feeling I have that it's very easy to start a revolution which tears everything down, and then sort of hope that something better emerges in its place. And it's so, this in history it so rarely has, and it's kind of just this sort of tragedy of revolutions since the French one, basically.
So the concerns that the US ambassador expressed then, were they quite carefully worded? What did they say that upset Tunisia? And why has no other country of significance said anything else?
I think it was quite carefully worded. Blinken said that he was concerned about what this referendum meant for the country. But even so, you can understand why that got Tunisia's back up. As for what the reason behind other countries' silence is, well, in the region, Saudi supports what's going on there, and so does Iran. So I think there's some local support that's worth considering in this question. But at the same time, internationally, for the West in particular, its dealings with the countries across Northern Africa and the Middle East tend to be often self-interested. And if they don't see an immediate gain that can be made out of the transition from one regime to another, say, or support for one party as opposed to another, then they're not going to intervene. And in this case, I don't think that they see that their support for the current government, and particularly Said, is in any way a threat to their own interests in the region. So that's probably why countries are being generally quiet on the question.
I would assume that the US is probably quite reluctant to sort of involve itself further in Middle Eastern politics, given the last 30 years, and therefore probably, I don't know if you want to say quite rightly, but has learned that it's probably, I don't know, I think the Middle East probably thinks it's heard enough from the US on its political affairs, and therefore, yes, I can imagine why they would word, kind of their criticism so carefully.
Okay. Tom, I'm coming to you next after this. Okay, Tom, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Have we finally worked out how to protect the most vulnerable from COVID?
Another 1.7 million people in England are being told to shield because they face a serious risk from coronavirus. As a result, many will move up the queue for a vaccine.
The headlines from the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4 from February 2021. But, Tom, COVID has not gone away, as people are fond of saying. What's the latest?
So, this week, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, announced that they're going to look into the use of a drug called Evusheld for the immunocompromised. Now, the way I've just put it might not sound that exciting, but it's quite a big deal. There's a large number of people. The clip was from last year and it was 1.7 million, but it's different now. It's about some in the low hundreds of thousands, somewhere between 200 and 500,000 people for whom vaccines fundamentally don't work. Their body doesn't make a proper immune response to them. So they are still at enormous risk from COVID. And a significant minority of those people are still shielding. And people are rightly, understandably saying, well, COVID isn't over. How do we protect these people? Should we impose more restrictions on the population? Large groups of the patients themselves are calling for is the use of this drug, Evusheld.
Okay. And what does Evusheld actually do?
Well, vaccines teach your body how to make antibodies. Evusheld just gives you the antibodies directly. It injects the antibodies directly into your bloodstream. They'll then protect you pretty much as well as a vaccine, knock on wood, for about 6 months.
Okay, and why can't the people who are immunocompromised bodies learn through the vaccine? What's missing? What's the bit that doesn't work?
Basically, without going too deep into immunology, they don't have working immune systems. Their bodies don't. The cells that make the antibodies that would fight off the disease don't work.
Okay, so this just gives them an equivalent dose, like a vaccine.
Yeah, exactly, and it's been approved by the MHRA, the medicines regulator, since March. But for some reason, the government has not procured any of it. There have been people calling for it for a long time there, but you can't get it on the NHS. You can get it privately because it's through if you've got money to do so, but you can't get it on the NHS. We do not have any supplies laid in nationally, and people are asking why, because it seems to be very effective. 32 other countries have got it. The fact that NICE have this week somewhat belatedly said they will do it is welcome, but for lots of other drugs such as Regeneron and various antivirals, the NICE and the government said, okay, we won't wait for the full evaluation. We'll just get them in now and sort of evaluate as we go. And they haven't done that. And there's a lot of people wondering why the hell not. So while this is welcome and hopefully in the next few weeks and months we'll get the things moving on, for the time being, there's still a large number of people living in just basically their lives utterly limited, waiting for this drug that could seriously fix things.
I'm sure it's kind of a shock if you're not immunocompromised, isn't it, to remember that whilst we've got on with so-called living with the virus, there are people for whom the lockdown never ended.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to remember. There's hundreds of thousands of people who have been living in the way that we all look back on now with horror for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And of course, we live in, a society where we try and pride ourselves on the fact that we protect the vulnerable, we look after the vulnerable. And actually, in this case, for some reason, we're not doing that, even though there seems to be an incredibly obvious solution right in front of us. And obviously, there are lots of other health factors with not being able to see your friends and family as well, like, not to mention, huge mental health problems that come with not seeing your friends and family and come with not living your normal life. And we should definitely be considering that as well. We talk about pressures on the NHS. Mental health is a huge pressure on the NHS. So it seems like, we're being really short-sighted and, in some ways quite discriminatory by not tackling this head on and kind of coming up with a solution as quickly as possible, especially when it seems to be there for the taking.
Okay, but Arion, let's try and get our heads into the health secretary and the government and the head echelons of the NHS. Why might they be resistant to this idea? Cost seems an obvious one.
I think that's it, really. It has costs attached, but it's not meant to be outrageously expensive. So, for example, the US federal government has bought 1.7 million doses of Evusheld for about £700 million, which works out to about £400 a dose. Some other sources say it could be more like £1,000 a dose. But if you consider the fact that people need 2 doses of this a year to maintain their coverage, that would mean £1,600 per person per year. And yes, that's a lot more than, say, the vaccine costs, which tends to be about £20 per dose.
But far fewer people have to take it, obviously, because it's a minority.
Well, exactly, yeah. So if you added all the costs up, it would still come to less than was, for example, as Tom, you pointed out in the feature that you wrote for the Eye about this, it would still work out to being less than the amount that was wasted on unusable PPE right at the beginning of the pandemic. So, yes, it does have a big cost, and that's probably why the government is hesitating on this.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good bit of rhetoric, Tom, about the PPE. But I suppose the per year point is the relevant one, isn't it? That was a one-off blunder, as it now seems now, at the time of a crisis. But we're talking about spending £1 billion per year. That's the bit that might give people pause for thought. $1 billion doesn't seem like such a big number these days, but every year is a lot.
No, is it though? I mean, I will say, yes, it is every year, and that is a non-trivial cost. I get that this is something that we $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, right? But as a fraction of the overall NHS costs, it's trivial, less than not trivial, but less than well below 1% of the NHS's overall costs. I would also make the case, and I should admit, as Arion said, I've written a thing for the Eye recently, in which I come out pretty strongly in favour of doing Evusheld, so declare my interest and all that. But there are second order benefits which I think are worth considering here. Firstly, the hospitals are full of immunocompromised patients with COVID. They're the ones who end up in hospital more, because the rest of us don't. Even very elderly people who were vulnerable a year ago, they now are almost exclusively, they have a bit of a bad time with it, but very, very rarely end up in hospital. Very, very rarely end up dead. The people who do are the immunocompromised, and so this would reduce pressure on the NHS, reduce costs that way. So it may pay for itself to some extent. The other point is that immunocompromised people are a major source for new variants, because while you or I would get the disease and clear it from our systems in 2 weeks, it could stay in an immunocompromised person for months. So you end up with the virus having lots of time to evolve in someone's bloodstream, in someone's body rather. That's where you get new variants from. Now, obviously, we can't stop the world from creating new variants, but we can reduce the UK's burden of new variants, and I think that's. I strongly suspect that the cost would pay for itself.
I suppose we also can't stop immunocompromised people being ill, Sorcha, and that's the other thing that complicates this, isn't it? If you're at high risk of COVID, you're also at high risk of other things too. The world is already a dangerous place. You can't mitigate everything, so you spend all this money, but then someone who's immunocompromised still might not be able to leave the house for other reasons.
No, but we should be, I think, making our best efforts to ensure that people can live relatively normal lives in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of this specific illness that kind of affected the whole world. And I think, at the end of the day, it's much more difficult to, and probably almost impossible to ask people, the UK as a whole, to go back to sort of lockdowns, or, well, not lockdowns, but severe restrictions on, who we can meet and where we can go, etc. I just don't see that happening. Whereas, this is something that we can do that will protect people who need protecting.
And arguably maybe should have done in the first place, Arion, rather than lockdowns at all. I appreciate we didn't have a vaccine then.
Possibly, but I suppose you've almost answered your own question that this is a new treatment. And so I think there has been an eye on trying to get support for immunocompromised people, but we've only arrived at it comparatively recently. And now is the time to ask ourselves the question of whether we should be rolling it out here, as is being done in, I think it was 32 other countries at last count.
Do you think the current situation in the Conservative Party, Sorcha, might have had a negative influence on this? I just wonder, I had to Google who's the health secretary. It turns out it's Steve Barclay. But, if you're a charity for the immunocompromised and you're petitioning him and he's thinking, well, I might not be in a job in 2 weeks' time, that's got to make a difference to these decisions, hasn't it?
I mean, I think undoubtedly, honestly, I don't really see what can truly get done in Parliament over the next few months, at least until we have a next Prime Minister, and another Conservative Prime Minister. And even really until we have a general election, I don't really see how effective we're really going to be at kind of properly engaging with the challenges that are coming up with the end stages of the pandemic. I think, Conservative Party, I think, basically is totally eating itself and engaged in party politics, and sort of thinks the pandemic is really done and isn't actually on most people's minds anymore. I don't really.
It's not coming up in the debates, is it? Between Truss and Sunak.
No, not at all.
And internationally, Tom, just finally on this, what I found quite interesting about the research on Evusheld is that a lot of it comes from Israel, doesn't it? And what is it about Israel that is consistently doing so well in healthcare? I know Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, went there on a research trip. They're often cited in these kinds of things, and yet they're a small country. They also have a public health system. Should we be trying to do more things like them?
Yeah, I think we also should be under attack from several countries all around us. I mean, they have got they're a very immigrant-based society, so I imagine lots of it wouldn't entirely surprise me if they've got a load of the smartest people from around the world have moved into it. Would be one thing, and they've got some brilliant universities, but God knows what it is that they've done right. I will also say, like, every country at some point in the pandemic, every country gets pointed at and saying, "Look what they're doing, isn't it great?" Like Germany, hasn't Germany done brilliantly? And then a few weeks later, they get a massive Omicron wave and loads of people die. Yeah, and you can probably systematically say that Israel did better than most, but they also had some bad times in it. I think there probably are things we can learn about from their healthcare system, from their university system, from their political system, but they also have all sorts of messes of their own, which I wouldn't want to necessarily import to here.
Okay. Sorcha, you're up next with something completely different after this. Okay, Sorcha, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
It's the week we learned that the OG of reality TV is back.
As soon as everyone's up, the meeting is called.
Okay, well, I've got a very important thing I want to bring up. I think everyone should be aware of it, and it's everybody's concern. Basically, sorry I have to say it, Nick, but I'm very disappointed in yourself. I not only feel I'm quite positive and got evidence that you're plotting a very dirty plan on everybody in here to vote against each other and steer it divert from you.
Oh, I'm 18 again. Big Brother winner Craig Phillips exposing Nasty Nick on Channel 4's pioneering reality show back in 2000. Sorcha, why? Why are we hearing an old clip from Big Brother?
Well, so as this year's series of Love Island came to an end on ITV2, it took the opportunity to announce that Britain's first official reality TV show is back, Big Brother, and it will come back onto our screens next year after a 5-year hiatus. And I think it will largely be the same show that we all knew and loved. And it will see a cast of carefully selected housemates from all walks of life live together under strict surveillance for up to 6 weeks.
Okay. And Sorcha, in your view, is this a good idea? Or, as Craig Phillips would say, is it a very dirty plan?
I have to say, I love the idea. I think like many people my age, I am obsessed with reality TV. I love Love Island, and I loved Big Brother. In fact, when I think it was Big Brother, I didn't watch Big Brother. I think that clip's from Big Brother 2.
No, that's Big Brother 1.
Big Brother 1. I
remember it very clearly. I know where I was.
Yeah, I think I was barely conscious at that age. Yeah, practically. But my parents had to take the TV out of my room for, I think, Big Brother 5 and 6, because I would stay up all night watching it on the live feed. And they just thought, obviously incredibly inappropriate, terrible, mind-rotting show. But that is where my love of reality TV kind of stemmed from, I think. So I'm extremely excited and will definitely watch it.
I mean, look, the thing is, Arion, with these old TV formats, something that is as bankable an idea, a brand, as Big Brother, it's always going to attract advertising, isn't it? So you can understand why it kind of migrates from Channel 4 to Channel 5, now ITV2, each time going to a channel with slightly fewer viewers. But of course, it's going to get double the audience of their normal shows. You can see economically why they do this, but really why? I mean, culturally, why?
I mean, it's sort of a question why it went off air in the first place is if, as you say, it was such a bankable idea. And maybe it went off air because it had run out of steam, partly because it strayed so much from its initial premise, which was very sort of, rudimentary and a little bit haphazard. I think that reality TV as a genre was in such a sort of youthful state that no one quite knew what to do with it. Even that idea of having 24-hour coverage, like that's something that now that reality TV is so airbrushed and often plotted and sort of there's a blur between what's real and what's fake, that would be so anathema to a whole lot of contemporary shows. And so I think even in bringing it back, they're going to have to make some really difficult decisions about whether they're bringing back the show in its format as it was when it first went to air, or the show as it was at the end when it was all sort of gimmicks and tricks and often celebrities and new things being implanted into their house each week. But I think, or if they're going to do something totally different and try to learn from the reality TV that has come since and try to adopt some of those things. And you sort of cannot help but feel that it's going to be Love Island, but in the old Big Brother house. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I imagine it's going to be.
Well, certainly Big Brother fans, Tom, online, who I've been reading, would be most annoyed if it was Love Island, but in the old Big Brother house. You know, they say, you know, including people like Rylan, who presented one of the more recent series on Channel 5, say the whole point of Big Brother is the diversity of the casting. So you have older people in there, you have people who are unpolished. The people loved on Big Brother, people like Jade Goody, are not the people who would have lots of followers on Instagram now. It shouldn't be like Love Island.
I mean, this has taken me right back to the the early 2000s and all sorts of stuff. And I think what I forget about a lot of the telly from that late 90s, early 2000s period is how cruel it all was. These programs were horrible. I'm sure you all enjoyed them very much, and I don't want to make you feel bad about it. But there were loads of
one who didn't watch reality TV.
Yeah, sorry about that. I watched them. I didn't watch as much as many, but I watched.
Just in a judgmental way, where you went into the office the next day and said, "I'm sure you all enjoyed."
Yeah,
it.
No. I did watch them, but it wasn't just the Big Brother, but all these other programs about just making fun of fat people and making fun and just there was a period in the early 2000s when this sort of the lad culture, lad mag era was still part of things, and it felt much more okay to just be really cruel to randomly selected members of the public. And I feel like that you could see the tension in that as we went later on, because then there was the racial slurs incidents and people getting thrown off when people realized, we can't have this sort of unvarnished reality anymore because society is getting kinder and more, and so I don't know. I think what I'm saying is I'm nervous coming back in case they try and do that again, but I don't think they can't have it like it was in the early 2000s because it was really horrible. Anyway, that's just my memory of it all anyway.
Lots to unpick there, Sorcha.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality thing, people drinking too much, being racist, that was all part of the entertainment. Do you think that can be part of the entertainment now?
I agree with Tom. I almost can't imagine us going back to kind of those days of reality TV where it was really brutal. Even, live evictions where people were being booed and screamed at, things thrown at them. It's looking back on it, it's really, really terrible. And, as much as I say I enjoyed it, but yes, actually, when you look back, it was a lot more harsh than.
Sorry, I've made you all feel bad about it.
No, now I feel terrible. Yeah.
But on that welfare point of view, I mean, we're in a world now where Jeremy Kyle's show is off air. Love Island has had a couple of deaths. So do you think you can't bring back a reality show anyway without that kind of duty of care? So that has to be part of it.
Yes, absolutely. I think viewers especially have much higher expectations over safeguarding and health and safety and mental health support, and they want to see that, and they want to know that is in place. I guess in some way maybe it's to kind of allay your guilt a little bit, and knowing, I can watch this, and I can at times watch these people suffer because I know there's safeguarding in place now, or you hope there is, or these shows claim there is safeguarding in place. So yeah, I don't think it could ever be as kind of cruel and wild and raw as it was.
But then the format, if you take the format back to its bare bones, Arion, the format is literally making people starve and do a shopping list and then root out who they dislike the most. That's the format. It's like, if it's Big Brother, that's what it is. It doesn't matter whether you've done psychological vetting first.
I think that's right. And necessarily most of the drama came by virtue of just hothousing these people and having them in a situation where there's too little to do, there's too little food, and then just letting things play out as they get increasingly fractious towards one another. And I think that, altogether the timing of this revival is particularly odd. And this was a point made by the Telegraph as well. And there's been quite a lot of speculation about this. But there's been a lot of focus on the dangers to contestants of reality TV in particular. We had documentaries have been coming out about the aftermath of going on these shows for contestants. And then Ovi Soko, a former Love Island contestant, was in a 2020 documentary about the dangers of reality TV, which he described as the format itself as a rotten apple dipped in gold. There's just a lot of feeling sort of community-wide and society-wide about the idea that these shows don't benefit the people who go on them. Still, curiously, so many people want to go on them, I think because maybe they imagine that they're going to be the exception to the rule, that they're going to be the person that the nation takes to its breast and loves, as opposed to loving to hate, which is the vast majority of people who go on the show. And that is our feeling. I think that's what's titillating about it as a viewer, that you can't help but tune in because there's that one person who really, really upsets you, and you just want to see what they're up to next. I mean, Olly, you love Big Brother. Is it for you? Is
How
it like,
dare you out my preferences on this show?
Is it a guilty pleasure, or is it just a pure pleasure for you?
Do you know, actually, if I'm being honest, what I love is Celebrity Big Brother. Because it comes with the hubris of someone who's in the public eye being brought down a peg, and that's easier for me to watch than people being humiliated in the way that you describe. But in the golden days, I did watch it a lot, and I think that's because there was another reason people used to participate, which is just they wanted a nice summer. There was an emphasis on kind of 18 to 21-year-olds who were sort of doing it instead of an 1830s holiday. Craig in that clip that we played was there because he fancied trying something new and raising some money for his disabled niece, wasn't it, when he won? You don't get that kind of candidate anymore because it is so knowing. You can never really recapture that, can you, Tom?
Well, no. I mean, I think this is an arc with every reality show, really, is that it started out with a sort of relatively interesting cross-section of society, and they ended up very soon with the sort of person, quite often quite a damaged sort of person who just desperately wants to get on TV. And I think there's a lot of people who end up being that, and you can psychologically vet them as much as you like. But if you end up psychologically vetting a huge group of people who are basically quite sort of damaged and publicity seeking to begin with, then you're not going to, I don't know.
All right. It's a no from Tom. Sorcha, would you go on Big Brother? I'm not saying would you apply. I'm saying if a producer said, I've been watching you on Instagram, you're just perfect, you're just what we need, would you do it?
Never, ever, ever, ever in a million years.
Arion?
I think I'd be tempted, but ultimately I'd turn it down. I read a piece in the Times by Claire Cohen, who is a journalist who went undercover to see how it works, and she made it so far through the process that they actually wanted her on the show, but she eventually turned them down because in like the first couple of rounds of the process involved her basically just trying to outwit and out extrovert everyone else. But the last step was this 35-page questionnaire, which she said started innocently enough with like, who do you want to live with and what makes you happy? But then it started to ask questions like, describe your most unusual sexual experience. Would you sleep with someone for money? If so, how much? What's your bra size? And she just went, nah, it's not for me. And I think that probably if I even engaged with the process of application, probably I would come unstuck because that would horrify me.
I was going to say, it's kind of what's interesting about Love Island. Love Island, its name is Love Island. You think it's going to be this incredibly sexy, slightly risque show. What is incredible is it's actually so sanitized. They can't drink, they can't swear. Anything that happens is all under the covers. That kind of absolutely willingness to bear all and to be really raw on TV is totally, totally gone. And like you said earlier, I don't think it will ever come back. People are too aware. And the people who are asked to be on these shows, are people who are basically already famous, who have millions of Instagram followers.
Well, the results are in, and it is now time to evict you all from the Week Unwrapped house. My thanks to Arion, Sorcha, and Tom. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. Remember, too, to check out our sister show from the week, The Overview. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.